Welcome, Jo-Ann. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Oh, hello, Matt. Nice to see you again. A little bit about myself. I've got quite a varied background, not a medical background. I studied languages at university, and then moved to London. And like many humanity arts students, I started working in sales, later moved into account management within advertising. And there was a wave of mergers acquisitions happening at this time in this sector. My role disappeared in one of the agencies I was working for. So to make ends meet, I temped for a short time in a recruitment team within an HR department in a large organisation. And I found this work intrinsically more satisfying than my previous jobs. And I realized it was because I was dealing with people and their real life concerns rather than promoting products or building brands for clients. Which all seemed maybe with benefit of hindsight a little bit artificial to me. So this realization led to a change in direction, and I started to work in a specialist recruitment company within advertising. So was able to use my previous knowledge in a different way. I established myself in within a niche in the market, and after 4 years or so, felt I was really flying high and feeling very confident. And this was in the late 90s, and I sort of took the plunge and set up my own recruitment business, which I then ran successfully for nearly 20 years. So a few years ago, I moved to Oxfordshire, where I continued with my business. I became associated with an advocacy charity. The work that they taught me, it taught me about the real value of supporting people, the value of impartial support, should I say, with their decision making. And this, coupled with my experience of supporting my father in a big life change, inspired me to formalize training and develop myself professionally within the area of coaching. So, started the MA in coaching and mentoring at Oxford Brookes Business School. And there we go. I sort of graduated this year, and sort of working within the area of career coaching for graduates and early people in their early stages of their careers. So that's it in a nutshell.
I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about graduates transitioning into the workplace. Um, I mean, that's quite a challenging time. What do we know? Why is it challenging, and what do we know about that challenge?
Well, that's right. Yes, it is a real challenge, particularly for this age group. Not particularly, but it is a transition, and it's a life shift. It's moving away from home, moving away from home university, sort of standing on your own 2 feet. It sort of requires a whole sort of mindset shifts as well. And it can be quite bewildering and sort of leaving your support networks and so on at university, and sort of having to stand on your own 2 feet, and you know being judged as well. A lot of times things are quite gentle, maybe quite gentle at university, but in the world of work, obviously you're being judged, you're being paid, you have to sort of perform, if you like. So yes, there are feelings of insecurity and fear, and all about the unknown. And yeah, I mean, it is a sort of a quite a tricky time at the moment. I wrote my dissertation. I focused my dissertation at Brookes uh, on this, particularly on this sort of this group of this demographic, if you like. I conducted sort of very in-depth interviews with quite a number of of high-performing graduates who'd been accepted on to graduate training programs in large organizations. So quite sort of prized positions, if you like, quite competitive and environment. And I wanted to sort of hear firsthand what their experiences were like. There's a lot of perceived wisdom out there about graduates, and lots of articles in the HR business press, lots of things on the popular articles as well on the radio, newspapers, etc. Is all about the stereotype of this particular age group, these millennials, if you like, end of, yeah, this sort of people born at this time, um, talking about their, some point to them being very entitled and anxious, particularly anxious. They have high expectations of their organizations. Um, and there is quite a lot written, especially in the business and HR press, um, about the protean, if you like, careerist profile being the winner. And what I mean by that is, uh, protean is somebody who can change easily, frequently. They're very versatile. They can do different things. They can, they move frequently between organizations, and these people, this sort of this type of people are portrayed as the winners. So this sort of doesn't sort of sit terribly well with young graduates necessarily. Because,
That sounds like a winning formula to me. If you're able to flex and do lots of different things, I mean, that sounds like a great characteristics in a young graduate, I would say.
well, absolutely it is, but is that the reality, Matt? So young people, they go into these organizations, they're sort of required to be very self-reliant, and almost nowadays, this is more the expectation than it used to be. So in years gone by, perhaps our parents' generation, or you had jobs for life and so on. You have you have these had a relational contract, if you like, psychological contract between employer and employee, where which
What do you mean by that,
well
then? Yeah.
well, I suppose what I mean by that is that it was there was sort of loyalty inbuilt in that relationship. It was a relational relation. There was the expectation that the employer would would sort of commit to offering or long-term security to the employee, and in return, the employee would be um, loyal and work there for many years. And so that is no longer the case,
Yeah,
for quite a long
absolutely.
time now, and it's even becoming more volatile now. So people talk about this relationship, this psychological contract has shifted from being a relational one to being a much more transactional, where the company can't commit to offering long-term employment security, and but in its place perhaps the company will offer employees good learning, professional development opportunities, high pay, and in return the employee will work hard, but that's the extent of it. And there's an understanding that when the employee has got what they need, they will move on. So this is the portrayal, if you like. It's not necessarily the reality, and there's a lot of different things said in the press, but um, whatever the reality, whatever the truth is, I suppose we can say that um, that really, whether it's relational, non-relational, whatever, there's no doubt that the psychological contract has shifted. To what extent, we don't know, but it has definitely shifted in a way which now encourages employees to be self-reliant and manage their own sort of career plans, if you like. They can't rely upon their employers rather, to do that for them. So this is the environment that young graduates find themselves, and it can be quite challenging. Yeah.
It's interesting, Joanne, because if I think back when I entered the world of work, we used to have the firm. I know that your research didn't particularly deal with doctors. I do think that what you found, I think, is very translatable. But when I entered the world of work, we had the firm, and and there was the consultant, the senior edge, the reg, the SHO, and the house officer, and we did everything together. And you belonged to a team, and the team looked after you, and the team trained you and developed you, and and you stayed in touch. And I think NHS also was a different organisation than it is now. And I think, I mean, it's interesting to hear you say that, because I suspect what's happened in the NHS, then it sounds like that's just a reflection of the world of work out there, which is that work is no longer a relationship in the way that it was. Work is a transaction, which I think maybe sort of my personal view is I sort of find that a little bit sad. Yeah.
Sad, absolutely. It's sad, especially in your sector, you know, in perhaps different in the business sector. Um, so, you know, as I mentioned, it's comparable. My set of graduates that I interviewed with yours, in insofar as these were the people I interviewed were, you know, people who'd sort of gone to sort of high flying universities, got really good degrees, and were perhaps selected, maybe one or a few of just a very few number of places within these sort of large organizations. Um, so, so yeah, they had high expectations. I suppose young people, any young person, whether it's a doctor or economics grad or whoever, they will have high expectations of their employer going when they join, won't they? And I suppose if those expectations aren't met, it will lead to potential problems down the line.
So what are young graduates expecting as they enter the world of work?
Well, yeah, so, you know, certainly they're looking for stimulating work. Okay. Stimulating work. They're looking for more egalitarian relationships with their managers. So certainly some of the people I interviewed, they felt there's such a disconnect when they joined their organization, and it was a very much sort of, you know, quite hierarchical, and a sort of top-down management style, and the manager didn't have time for them. They were treated as a bit of a commodity. They felt, this is according to these are their accounts. They felt that the graduate training program was um, it was sort of outdated. It really didn't speak to them, you know, the language of young people, well, a lot of young people now. So it talked about leadership, for example. One person I interviewed in particular, she was sort of really taken aback, quite insulted. She said it was as if they were just spouting this stuff from a 1980s manual, HR manual. So she was quite funny. And she said, I don't necessarily even know if I want to be a leader. So they're constantly pushing this thing about leadership. Um, so yeah, sorry, I forgot what your question was now, Matt.
I
I
think
always
what I'm interested in what people's expectations are, and of course we're generalizing, aren't we? Because
we are
every
generalizing.
person's
Yeah,
different. But yeah, so I think it was around what are young people
egal.
expecting of work?
Yeah, that's right. Well, one of the things which came out of my study was that well, the role of the manager, really. So in terms of y- you know, well, it's not complicated. I'm just wondering how to express this. It's some of the findings, okay, from my research showed that despite these young people who were highly this, that, and the other, and high achievers, etc., they displayed all of the things you would expect a young person to feel, because they're still developing, aren't they? These people are in their early 20s, early mid 20s. So the things they talked about a lot were lack of self confidence, and despite the fact that they were, you know, high achievers, again, real fear of failure, self-doubt, insecurity, um, finding the voice to talk to more senior people and so on. And their expectations were that somehow, well, because they had this self-consciousness, and, you know, people always trying to sort of join everything, and not missing out on any social occasions, um, they they sort of they were sort of, you know, couldn't necessarily open up to if they were experiencing any anxieties or problems. So it was interesting that HR, for example, was perceived as by actually all of the people I spoke to, with a bit of suspicion. Sort of maybe that reflects the sort of lack of confidence of people at that age group. They sort of saw HR as more of a remedial thing, and they didn't want to admit to any weakness. And so yeah, the some of the graduates, they certainly were looking for their managers to be um, to assume a role of a guide almost, so to have not just tell them what to do, but really sort of be a guide, a mentor, a coach. It was all about the relationship. And so they wanted somebody who would understand them, what they needed in terms of their learning and development, but also even in extremis, there were a couple of people I spoke to who had quite sort of severe anxiety during lockdown, and they just didn't know which way to turn. They found that when they talked, eventually sort of, uh, became a bit braver and talked to somebody, they felt much better about it. But there was that fear of opening up and fear of being vulnerable. So they were seeking a sort of a relational engagement. With the manager. I mean, of course, these are ideals, aren't they? But when the graduate felt that the manager really understood them, and had taken the time to sort of to scratch below the surface, this was when it really sort of helped.
I'm,
Um,
I'm, I'm interested, maybe you can tell me a little bit more about that. I'm a senior doctor, and for the other senior doctors listening, or for NHS managers and leadership listening, what can we as individuals, or what can we as organizations do to better
mm,
support new doctors as they first enter the world of work?
yes. Well, it's about this idea of um, building a relational depth. Um, um, and so you sort of think, well, what is that? What is that relational depth? So is it just telling somebody what to? But it's about learning emotional intelligence skills, um, being able to blend that empathy, encourage people to be open and genuine, and build a strong connection. So really, it is about, I think, developing skills over and beyond the pure learning, if you like. Does that make sense? Um, Developing, I think, emotional intelligence skills.
I'm interested. Okay, so I'm going to go to work tomorrow, and I might have interactions with an early career doctor. I'm sure there are some skills that I need to develop, and maybe that might take a bit longer. But what kind of actions can I take tomorrow that's going to help young
Mm,
doctors when they're first entering world of work?
yeah. I think sitting down with them and taking the time to listen to where they're up to, and not assuming that they're just able to get on with stuff, or
Okay.
that it can be somebody else's problem. I think um, I think young people have this, that especially I can imagine young doctors, but also the graduates I spoke to, they feel this enormous sort of burden, and they're feeling that maybe they have to figure things out themselves, um, because if they open up, it might be perceived as weakness. So I think taking the time and the care to sort of nurture them. These are young people, they're still developing an enormous amount in mentally and so on. So I think that would be probably my top tip there, really.
Mhm. And again, if I think then as organizations, what do we, as a system, as a team, what kind of things do we need to put into place to make sure that people are set up to succeed when they first enter world of work?
Hmm. Well, it's sufficient training for doctors in non-clinical areas to do so. I mentioned emotional intelligence, for example, and the importance of the relationship. I mean, these are all people skills, aren't they? So, I mean, it is obviously in the interest of everybody, isn't it? Because you want to retain your staff. So, sort of employee retention programs in some way, because people are, they're voting with their feet now, aren't they?
And
So yeah,
people skills are useful for early career doctors, and people skills are useful for everybody else as well, aren't they? So
absolutely.
it's something, and some people have them, and some people find it easier to develop, and for some people it comes a little bit more difficult. The other thing that's coming up for me, as you mentioned, that is that time. Because I think one of the challenges that we have maybe in healthcare and probably in industry also is everybody's just so busy,
See,
so,
yeah,
so busy all the time, and it's very easy sort of to cut out the time that you might want to spend with an early career doctor. Even if you have that in your timetable, it's probably one of the first thing that's going to end up going
yeah,
when you're busy, because it's one of the things that's important, but it's never on top of your priority list, because there's always something else that's more urgent. Yeah, so even we'll recognize it's important, but there's always something else that's more urgent. But I think you are spot on in the kind of sense about how people succeed and retention, because that strikes me as a really worthwhile investment. It's a worthwhile investment of the time of the senior doctors, to invest, because probably like 10-minute conversation that probably would go a long way, wouldn't
that's
it? It
right.
doesn't have to be a
Yeah.
3-hour talk. Yeah, so a 10-minute listening conversation every now and then, that it sounds, from what you're saying, that's going to go a long way towards building the relationships that then means that people succeed and people stay.
Yes, indeed. And prioritizing well-being, this is a time that people rushing around and working really hard. I imagine as junior doctors, um, not even having time for breaks. The foundation doctors, year one doctors, not having time for breaks, not eating and drinking properly, not having time to go and do exercise, prioritizing their well-being. I mean, these have enormous implications on people's well-being and ability to function well at work. So yes, very important to
You
look at that.
certainly can't do that for any length of time. You might be able to do that for a month or two, but
Yeah.
but that kind of behavior, that's not sustainable
No.
over the long term. So okay, so anything else about what senior doctors, leaders, organizations can do to set up young doctors for success when they first enter work?
Well, so I've mentioned taking the time to develop the relationship, taking the time to sort of have somebody allocated to you, um, development of emotional intelligence type courses, yeah, I'm just trying to think here. I'm not entirely sure that anything else is sort of
Okay.
as top priorities is springing to mind at the moment.
Well, let's move on to the young graduates, because I'm going to come and ask you about what they can do to prepare. But before I do that, it when you were saying earlier, it struck me as, gosh, they have really high expectations of themselves. Um, you're nodding.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are people, some of them, maybe it's the high achievement. I mean, maybe it's so much as expected of them now. They study so hard at school. These are not things that should necessarily change, but there is an awful lot of pressure. I think young people entering into the world of work, it's slightly different to when I started working. I remember being able to, I had the first 2 or 3 jobs, and I was able to get a mortgage, put down a down payment on a flat in London. I mean, that's unheard of now, isn't it? Um, and so I think things are just the pressure, the uncertainties of life now. I think there is a different climate that young people are experiencing. But maybe every generation says this. I'm not sure, but but certainly those markers of adulthood, if you like, buying that first flat, being independent, being able to stand on your own 2 feet. Uh, they're much trickier, it seems to me, now than it was for our generation. So starting out, so
Yeah.
I think that that must cause anxiety because a young person, after their mid-20s onwards, they want to buy their own place, they want to stand on their own 2 feet. If it's not possible, if they have to go back to home and live with their parents, I mean, there's all sorts of social media, my goodness, all the comparison, of course, and people posting constantly about how wonderful their lives are, their careers, and they're doing this. So yeah, it's in their face all the time, isn't it? There are lots of differences
It's
between
it's
now and
interesting. It's interesting, that I mean, here we are, two old people talking about young people. I do interview young people also, by the way. I don't just interview people that are my age, if you like. But it is because I'm trying to think, back to what you said. I mean, I probably had high expectations of myself, but I probably also, I mean, I entered work and then I was an adult. Yeah, I had a car. I also had enough money to put a mortgage. So all of that kind of, people settled down, got married, sort of had children. So you were in your early 20s and you were an adult. But I think what I'm hearing you say is that they enter work and they're expected to be much more of an adult than perhaps in the past people were, because in the past people led you, guided you, you were part of a team, you were there to be developed, whereas now people turn up and, from what you say, there's much greater expectations that they're going to know how to do stuff, and maybe outside of NHS they're going to move on. So there's that expectation that they're going to turn up to work and be an adult at work, but they can't be an adult outside the work because they can't have a mortgage, they can't get married, they probably can't have children. So
then.
it is sort of a slightly strange one. But I mean, what can people do? Sort of say, thinking of a final year medical student that's going to be starting work, over the next year or so. What can people do to prepare themselves for success?
Well, yeah, I suppose if you can't change the system, you've got to flex with it somehow, don't you? But yeah, we talked about people needing to be more increasing amount of self-reliance being expected of them, and even this like your own sort of little professional entrepreneur. You need to be able to promote yourself, get out there and sell yourself, if you like, to the marketplace. um, well, so if that is the reality, then you need to find ways um, of building your own brand, if you like. Again, horrible language, I think, but um, you have to build your brand. You have to sort of be very clear about who you are, what you need, where you're going, your whole career management plan, so that you can present yourself as a almost like a commodity. That this is my background, this is my credibility, this is how I can add value to your business or your organization. So yeah, this is probably what how you probably need to behave if you want to get on, if you like. Or this is again, we're speaking in huge generalizations here, but yeah, don't be well, presumably somebody who has reached the end of their medical training is not afraid to ask questions. That's taken for granted. But I suppose taking the initiative, not waiting for, not taking on a passive role, but it is about taking the initiative, um, uh, learning, accepting new challenges, not saying no to anything, just taking on something and just having that confidence to ride with it, taking risks, making mistakes, all of these things.
What kind of a mindset do people need to accept challenges and to be willing to take risks?
Well, I suppose you have to be open. I suppose it all depends on how much you feel you've got to lose, but this fear of failure was something. which came up quite a lot with the young grads I spoke to rather. Um, but somehow there's nothing to be afraid of. Why are you afraid so much? Fear of failure. Maybe we're talking about their expectations, but also we haven't talked about the expectations of their parents, for example. Some people have a lot of expectations laid onto them by their parents or society for whatever reason. So yeah, however they achieve it, to not be afraid to fail, to have an open mindset.
So
It's
there's that thing that's coming up for me about being afraid to fail is there's an assumption underlying that which goes, I'm perfect and I already know everything. I
mm,
think, isn't it? I'm perfect, I already know everything. Therefore I can't possibly fail, because if I fail, that's going to demonstrate that I'm not perfect and I don't
yeah.
know.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right, Matt. And I think this perfectionism is it's everywhere, isn't it? I've certainly experienced it with my children who are in their mid-20s, but they're wanting to be perfect um, in their work, the way they look, the way they present themselves to their peer group, and so on.
And
It's
you
not particularly healthy, is it?
And you're right, sort of about social media, where everybody presents a very carefully crafted image of themselves
Yeah,
to the public, and then everybody else watches and assumes that's the reality of what that person's life is like. And of course, increasingly we're all realizing that we're not. So I mean, I think for me about that failure, but particularly people early in their careers. If I think, early career doctors say, well, they're there to learn. Uh,
mm,
and if I think, what I would say to trainees that are working with me is, I mean, I'm the consultant. I'm there to know when to stop you so that you don't cause any harm. Yeah, that's my job. Yeah, so
sure.
my job is to protect patients, to make sure that the people that I work with work within the boundaries, that they've been appropriately trained, appropriately supervised, and I can watch people so that they don't make mistakes. Yeah, but that's my job, isn't it? Yeah, as the consultant that's oversees an early career doctor. I would say that their job is, obviously to keep me posted about how they're doing and what they know and what they don't know, and to ask questions, but also to learn. Because I guess, what for me wouldn't be okay would be somebody who keeps making the same mistake again. That wouldn't be okay. But, making a mistake and learning from it, I mean, that's great, isn't it? Yeah, because I mean, this is going to shock you, Jo-Ann, but you know what? I'm not perfect either. So 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 like, I mean, we're all learning, aren't we? So yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, no, and making mistakes. That can be a valuable learning experience. So switching that this burden of response, or this terrible fear of making mistakes, into trying to see it more as an opportunity to grow,
yeah,
and as a way of building your confidence. But yes, I think these anxieties that young folk have in their 20s are sort of age old, aren't they? We're not talking about anything particularly novel, new, but I think the environment that they find themselves now has changed enormously. So
yeah,
yes,
absolutely. I always think if people are anxious, I think for me that's a sign of a good doctor. If somebody's there saying, "Oh, I'm worried I'm going to do something wrong and a patient's going to come to harm," and I'm thinking, "Great, keep worrying."
yeah,
That's
no,
a really really good thing to have, because that tells me you care. That tells me that you want to do a good thing. So if you are worrying, that for me says that actually you're probably a good doctor, because you want to do a
yeah.
good job. Yeah, but there's I suppose there's the anxiety about doing a good job and taking what you do seriously, which is good, and there's the anxiety which gets in the way of learning, which isn't good.
Which is internalized, isn't it? And which is not shared, because
Yeah,
I think when you share things, and if you feel comfortable enough to be able to share it with some trusted ally at work,
mm,
that will relieve the burden to a certain extent anyway.
mm,
But yes, it's when you internalize things and don't talk about it and just go in on yourself. That's not particularly healthy.
mm, mm. What else can new graduates do to set themselves up for success?
Um, so yes, we talk about not trying not to compare yourself to others, but again, it's so difficult, isn't it? I suppose more practical things, perhaps find a mentor, allies at work, seek them out. If try to seek out that type of support. Taking care of yourself, we mentioned that earlier as well, but taking that time away from technology to, and really take the time to understand what your body needs, and taking time to spend with friends, you know, friends are very important. That
How,
feeling of connection and sort of connecting back to your, your previous life, your friends at school, perhaps, or whatever, if that makes sense. But I think friends, sharing things, connectivity, connection with others, it's incredibly important not to get too tunnel visioned about work, taking time out.
how do people find a mentor at work?
Well, yeah, I mean, HR, you need to probably, I'd imagine you'd have to look at the schemes. Different company organizations will have different schemes, but they're quite sort of widespread now. That's my understanding.
Mm,
Um, so to try and take the initiative and seek these things out, that would be a tip,
yeah.
top tip.
Yeah. So the HR scheme, the equivalent that I would see in healthcare would be the kind of clinical supervisor, educational supervisor, so that's somebody that you're allocated to. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I like the idea, of you said, of seeking out people. Yeah, because I think again, if I think as a senior doctor, it's always very flattering if somebody wants to come and talk to me. Yeah, so if
Mm.
somebody says, I want to hear your experiences, and I'm kind of thinking, I really don't have very much to say, but it's very flattering, isn't it? Sort of as a
Yes.
senior person, when a younger person comes and says, I want to learn from you, and I seek your advice. So I think you're right that a young doctor shouldn't be afraid to go and talking to a senior doctor to ask for their opinion and advice, because chances are the senior doctor is probably going to be quite flattered. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I think one thing that came up in my dissertation again was this young people, they don't necessarily know where their role fits into the bigger system, you know? So, like this particular girl I was speaking to, I think she was on some rotation in a large manufacturing company. And what she was doing was quite niche and, all absorbing, but she had no idea how it fitted into other functions and how. And so I can imagine having a mentor, having somebody, a manager, explain that, or for it to be incorporated into induction schemes. Just that sort of being able to gain an overview, and then being able to be signposted to sort of mentoring opportunities, or who could provide that support. That would be very useful.
And actually, if I think of that again, translating some of that directly into NHS context, is a lot of the time early career doctors say, I'm just rewriting drug chart. The only thing I do is chase blood results.
Mm,
And you're right, actually, because for me as a consultant, they are essential things that need to happen. And I see that those things are valuable. They might not be interesting, but they are
yeah.
valuable, and they contribute to patient outcomes. And it's perhaps that people don't realize quite how important their role is. So again, maybe an action that I need to take away is to help people recognize that whatever job they do, however niche or absorbing or isolating or boring it might be, that really makes a huge contribution to the overall system and the overall patient experience.
Totally. Yeah. I know. Yeah.
So maybe my final question, Jo-Ann, it would just be, what would be your top 2 or 3 tips for a young doctor that's about to enter the world of work for the first time?
I think it would probably need. There are many tips about getting on and all this sort of thing, but I think it has to be surrounding well-being. I think any top tips. tips about just pacing yourself, taking time out, sharing the load with loved ones, friends, family, etc. Mentor, ally at work if you manage to find suitable people with time. But yes, I think being kind to yourself, not putting too much pressure on yourself. But so easy to say, isn't it? But I say this from the standpoint of being a mother with a daughter who's in F1, and that's probably would be my top tip. Sort of checking in with family and friends regularly, because it is a huge shock to the system, isn't it? Starting that first professional job, that first career job, big change from university. So
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jo-Ann.